Well, it's the last step on our project. Time to go. It has just stopped raining, so it's a perfect time to get out to the garage. See if we can get this wheel mounted up and see what it looks like. Well, step one is, and I always want to make sure the bike doesn't slide forward while I have it up on the jack. I have an ordinary hydraulic car jack just to do a job just like this. It's very simple. If I was going to be more involved in this, I would use the come along, but for today, this is a relatively straightforward job. So the first little thing I did was check the air pressure. The air pressure hasn't varied at all in the several days that this has been sitting down there, waiting for a day like today that we had a time window to do the change. And one thing this is going to allow me to do when I change the sprocket carrier from black to gold, it may change the look at the back, and since this is the paint that matches the front forks, we'll kind of have something in the front of the bike balanced off by something gold in the back of the bike. I think that might look nice. And I'm sure having the gold wheel in the back instead of the black wheel, I know it changed dramatically when we went from the silver wheels. I like the black a lot better. Not sure if I like the green until I take a couple of rides and hear all the comments from the peanut gallery. Oh, with the bike jacked up, the rear wheel free, first thing I need to do is pull a caliper off. Just makes the job a lot easier when you can get the brake caliper off, no matter how you do it. And there's probably a way, if you really were cute, you could get it on without loosening a caliper and taking it off. Just isn't worth it. Takes 2 minutes to take it off, and then the job is a lot easier. So as you can imagine, it's right around the freezing mark out here today. My friend the quartz heater is my best friend on a job like this, and you can sit right by the quartz heater. Now, by looking at the wear on the brake pads, it looks like I have I'm about halfway through the wear. When those little bars disappear, those little grooves, and well before it would be a good time to replace them. Now I'll just take some zip ties and tie that up out of the way. That makes the job a lot easier, and I know you can do it without doing that, but this I always suggest take these off. Don't fool around. You save 10 minutes here, but boy, you just make the job a lot harder. Now before I put that back on, I'll get a little paintbrush and get in there and get any of the dust or any of the corrosion. Since we have been riding this bike on salty roads, there's bound to be some corrosion in there. I'll get that all cleaned up, but for now, I want to loosen the axle and pull the back wheel out. Now, you never know when it's going to be your lucky day with these kind of things. Sometimes these come right apart. Sometimes it's rubber hammer time. So I always try to figure out if it's my lucky day. I always try to figure out how strong I am, and usually the wrench wins. But anyway, this is probably the only part of the job that can be really annoying if it doesn't come apart exactly the way you want. Now what I do, I always leave the parts of the bike that go on this side, like the nut, the spacer, the chain adjuster, everything that belongs on this side stays on that side of the bike. The wrench goes on that side. That's loose, okay. Maybe it is our lucky day. But there can be days that it's not your lucky day. And you're crawling around. Oh my God, I don't even want to think about it. Anyway, that spacer, that part will stay right there. I know that. I have to move the wheel as far forward as possible now to get the chain off. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult. Sometimes it comes right off. And of course I want to take out the I need the rubber biscuits off of that. That wheel can now go in storage. Yeah, I guess we could have had 1 or 2 more rides on that tire, but boy, I know when you're down to the nitty-gritty on these tires, all you think about is every time you lean into a corner, is this going to be my lucky day or not? So that came apart pretty relatively straight. Now while I have it apart, biggest thing is to get inside there. I have some diesel fuel, a paintbrush. I'll put one of my old rags on and clean that all up. Because again, we have been riding the bike in salty weather. I don't want any corrosion. As I put it back, I'll polish the bolt heads, Loctite everything fresh and new. Redo the chain. Should be brand new by the end of the day. Now there's one thing that's really nice on this bike. And it's the shock on this bike is an air shock. So, and I usually run about 12 pounds of pressure. I've had it down to 5, I've had it up to 15. At somewhere around 11 or 12, it's just right for a person with a behind the size of mine. But anyway, the next thing is to get in there and clean that all up. And I have a spare shock just in case this ever goes. This is a 26-year-old shock, but so far, it's really good, in fact. So now I'll really get to see, the look of the bike with the green wheel, the look of the bike with the black wheel with the green stripe. And of course, at the end of this, I'll have both. And I'll get to compare. The biggest part of this is to compare the one size bigger tire. This is a 150, that's a 140. This is a Bridgestone, that's a Pirelli. And so the next time I get a tire, and it's about 5,000 miles these tires last when you ride, at least the way I do. So 5,000 miles from now, we'll make a decision. Do we want to get another Bridgestone? Do we want to get a Pirelli? Now the rubber dampeners, they just swap right out. This piece, I'll definitely clean this all up before I put it back together. This little spacer goes in there, and we'll be ready to swap it out. So one of my cleanup routines is I always have and it's one of the clear plastic things so that any diesel fuel I have is not, and I never use gasoline. Diesel fuel is the material of choice. In any of the places that sell women's beauty supply, you can buy one of these little spray bottles. And here's what happens that's good. Once you get this started, you can spray in there. Let that soak for about 5 minutes. This cleans it all up. Now there are certain things that I'd say to do, but to clean up everything like this, have a rag that you use for dedicated diesel fuel work. Leave it all in a bucket when you're done, and put the bucket, even if you have to, outside so you don't have to smell it. Diesel fuel's smelly, but it cuts right through the grit, the grime, and any of the oxidation that's still on there from riding a bike all winter. Because again, we do ride all winter. Or if you ride in the summer and you ride in the rain, it's the same thing. Now once I've wiped off all that diesel fuel, the last step is get some simple green down in there. Now all the rags that have diesel fuel on them go into the bucket where the diesel fuel is. All the rags for the simple green, they pretty much are going to get thrown away at the end of this job. But we'll have it all cleaned up, hopefully by the end of the job. Rags are cheap. Now one of the things I always try to do when I have anything apart is clean it up, polish whatever I can. The bolts that hold the calipers on. Just get it cleaned up, get any of the rust and corrosion off of it. Even the spacers that you don't even see. I like to go back, when I put this all back together, that they're all nice and clean. Now we have to get any of the corrosion off the axle. Just take a tiny bit of wheel bearing grease. It does two things. It makes the assembly going together a lot easier. Number one, I don't want to get any on the threads. I don't need to get it on the threads. And keeps this part, if you do ride in the rain or salt or corrosion, you don't wind up, at some point in time, especially if you don't change tires on a regular basis, getting the axle out sometimes can be a real bear. This makes it a lot easier. Now, a couple of tips will make this easier, no matter what bike you have. I put a little bit of wheel bearing grease on the spacers. That holds them in place so they don't fall out when you go to move the wheel in, most of the time. Get the chain on before I put the spacer in on this side. Get the wheel as far forward as it'll go. In some cases, and this bike, I don't remember if it's one of the bikes that you have to loosen the chain adjuster to get the axle in. Sometime you do. If you do, you just loosen the thing. And just redo the chain adjuster. Now with everything polished, cleaned, the wheel bearinged up, and lined up, hopefully, you never know. If all goes well here, it's the wheel bearing grease holding everything together that just makes this a lot easier. Oh yeah, all the way with LBJ. Look at that. Get the piece on the other side. It's my lucky day. Now I have a very old school way of checking that everything is in there okay, because there's always a possibility you haven't gotten something the way it should be, and we have the factory manual if all else fails. But the first thing is with the axle hand tight, just hand tight, I want to make sure I don't have any resistance at all. We've got all new grease in the wheel bearings. It's really cold out here, so this is a little more frictiony than it normally would be. Now, once I know I have no problem there, I can tighten up the axle and check the chain. Now the chain, I can look right ahead of time. I know the chain needed to be adjusted, so I'm going to adjust it right now. And then tighten up the axle and then spin it again and make sure everything is okay. I don't have any drag, because a lot of times if you have one of the spacers in incorrectly, you've got a drag on this. And even, you know, as careful as you can be, well, it can happen. Now the nice thing about doing this the old-fashioned way, I guess is the right way to put it, is if you do find a bind in anything, you'll know where the bind is. And as an example, it sounds like this wouldn't be a big deal, and maybe it isn't, but if you have some of these spacers in the wrong way, sometimes they'll fit in, and what happens when you tighten up the axle, it puts a bind on the wheel. I've seen that, especially in some of these older bikes. Now another thing, I have two ways of checking the chain. The marks on here, of course, are good, and I can put my finger and measure from the swing arm into the tire, to the edge of the tire, and if I do that on an RD, I can do that real easily. This bike, I really can't. But that's a good way to check that the wheel isn't really off. You're not off by a whole mark or so. Okay, chain looks about right. We're tightened down here. Put the cotter pin in, and then all we got to do is all we got to do now is put the caliper back on. So one of the points I always try to make is most of this kind of work here is pretty much like, I call it mixing concrete, because it's really not rocket science. It's just dirty work. And if you're willing to get your hands dirty, now I don't have any clue at all what a dealer would charge to do some of these jobs. And I don't care, because the dealer will never see this motorcycle again. Luciano will see it, Glenn will see it, other people that know what they're doing, Vince, but no dealers will ever see this bike again. So I have to kind of learn myself how to do some of these things. Relatively simple. Of course, you always get brand new paint. I got fingerprints on it already. I polished up the bolts just for myself. This is just for me. A lot of times now I want to still have some simple green on here. If in the course of doing this, somebody, myself is the only one here, so has stepped on the brake, the pucks come together, and it's pretty much impossible to get this back on. But let's see if it's our lucky day. Well, we keep having these lucky days. No, I gotta go get a big... See, somebody did touch that, and it was me. But anyway, when you can't get the caliper back on, you need to get a screwdriver. I usually have little pieces of wood I put in here. You got to get these to go back into the black forest here, I guess is the right word. See, if you have that little piece of wood and you can leave it in there, boy, that makes it nice and easy. I'm too lazy to go down. You know what? Too lazy. I'm going to go get the piece of wood. And there's a good lesson there. Be prepared. So once I spread that apart, I put the little piece of wood in there. Of course it went right in. I want to Loctite the bolts, blue Loctite. I don't want to fool around with this, taking any chances. that we're going to have an issue with this. Cheap insurance. And once these bolts are socked down real tight, then I can check again, once I got that tight again, that the wheel is spinning. If I feel like the pucks are dragging, I'll take it off, clean them out a little more. I already cleaned them off camera. They look pretty clean. The outside looks clean. I think we're pretty much ready to tighten that all down with the torque wrench, and we're ready to go. Now, of course, there's one final thing with everything done. Now, on a cool day, oh, and it's a little above freezing today, the wheel is going to have a little resistance because the wheel bearing grease is cold. But on a warm day, if it's 70, 80 degrees out, this should spin like a top. Nothing's dragging, pucks aren't hanging up, none of the spacers are dragging. We're ready to take that off the jack. We're ready to actually get ready to go for a ride. Now, as I look at the bike with the green back wheel, I actually like it. I do like it a lot. I was afraid I wouldn't like it, but I do. I like the little bit of gold on the sprocket carrier, and that's an exact paint match to the fork. So just like when I would design a model airplane paint job, I would try to carry the theme through so we'd have it kind of a match thing, I guess. I'm not sure, but I do like it. That really has exceeded my expectations. Now, I always think this is the side you see most of all, and because this is an 18-inch wheel, this is a 16, it really looks like you have a gigantic back wheel on the bike now. And that's, like I said, it's a 150 Bridgestone, one size bigger than stock. The front one is still a Pirelli. I'm not sure if I'm going to paint the front wheel green, because what's happening, we're coming up on the riding season here, and I got several projects I still have to finish. But that one, I'd count this one as one of the ones that, when I was done with it, I was real happy with it. If you followed through all the steps of painting the wheel, which we've done several times on the Windy videos, I hope you've enjoyed them all. You've been entertained, maybe picked up a few tips, something you can use and share with your friends, and share the passion of motorcycling that we all share, and most of all, enjoy every minute you have. And thanks for watching.